Hi everyone, Dr. Oz here. I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover this week in Science 148. So this week we're going to look at fats, and I'll give you a little bit of a rundown on, of course, what are good fats, what are bad fats, and the really bad fats, which of course are the trans fats. But we'll take a look at each of those briefly, and this week's assignment is also from the Omnivore Dilemma book. So take a look at that. First of all, in order to understand why fats are either good or bad for us, this structure over here becomes really important. Now you see this particular fat, it forms a straight chain, right? And you can see that they're very easily stacked right on top of each other. Now, these are the fats that aren't so good for us because they are stackable. And when they become stackable, this is where we get all the plaque and things like that that can build up in our blood vessels. Now, you'll notice this fat down here has kind of a bent structure to it. These are very difficult to stack, right, because of this bend. So consequently, these are the fats that are good for us because we need to have fats, right? So these are the fats that are going to be good for us because they can't stack one on top of the other. And these are going to be those fats that of course, are liquid at room temperature, like our vegetable oils and peanut oil and olive oil, things like that. Whereas these are the saturated fats, which are not so good for us, right? Things that are solid at room temperature, like the fats in butter and the fat on steak and stuff like that. Right? So, this kind of, just explains really what I just talked about and the way that those, remember, straight chain is going to indicate that we have a saturated fat, not good for us because it's stackable. And the bent chain is the unsaturated fat, which are the fats that are pretty good for us. So the oils and things like that. We, of course, need fats in our diet, right? Lots of different things that fats will do for us. First of all, there's a lot of energy involved in fats. So we need that energy, right, to power our metabolism, keep our cells developing and doing the things that we want our cells to do for us, like build membranes and filter things in and out of our blood, keep our nerve cells functioning at a very high level, all those things. Another thing, of course, is fats are good for insulation, right? We need to have a certain amount of fat on our body that serves as an insulating area, not only to retain heat, which is, of course, energy in our bodies, but to lubricate joints and things like that because of the impact and so on. So another thing, when we're looking at fats, there's a couple things. There's what we call lipoproteins. First of all, lipids are kind of a type of fat, and then cholesterol, which we'll look at. Usually when you go for a blood test or something like that, you're going to get what they call these HDL and LDL. Now, with the HDL, high density lipoprotein, right? These are, you want your HDLs, which are high, to be high, right? So you want a higher number there. And your LDLs, your low density lipoproteins, you want those to be low because those are going to indicate that you have cholesterol kind of building up in the blood vessels. So, there's a range that you'll be given, and the LDLs stay low on that range. The HDLs should be high on that range. So let's look at the bad fats, right? And, we've been talking all along about these saturated fats because of their ability to stack and build up in the blood vessels. So, as I mentioned many times before, these are going to be solid at room temperature. Our butters are, fats you'll find in your dairy products like cheese and milk. Butter, the fat right down, here's a good shot of fat on around a steak. Those are all fats that you don't want to have a lot of in your diet. And if you can avoid it as much as possible, go ahead and avoid those. The Harvard Food Pyramid, we're looking at, where do fats come in? Well, you see our red meat and butter up here. These are in the use very sparingly category. Here's our dairy products. Again, not too many servings there. So, we have to be very careful with using these, what we consider to be bad fats. Those are solid at room temperature. Why are they bad for you? Well, here's a good kind of look. Here's our blood vessel, and these should be wide open, right? So that blood can move very quickly through our system. Here's a shot kind of looking straight into the blood vessel. And with saturated fats, because of the stackable nature to them, they start to stack and form plaque. And you can see the plaque starts to build up in the vessel. And again, if we're looking in, this is a blood vessel that's probably 60% blocked, So sometimes, people will get, go see a cardiologist or whatever because they're having heart problems. And they'll say, hey, you have 3 of your heart vessels are, 75% blocked. We've got to do a bypass or something, some sort of procedure to alleviate that stress. And what they do with the bypass, of course, is they'll clamp off where the blockages are, and they'll take a vein from the leg, and they will totally bypass the part that they've clamped off. So they'll put a new vein, and they'll hook it up to the heart in both areas. And now you've got a nice clear vein like this one with no blockage. Obviously, the more blockage there is, the more danger there is. So, sometimes you'll hear people say, oh, they caught it, I was 90% blocked or 95% blocked. Well, when you get to almost 100% blocked, the blood cannot flow. So imagine, let's say a 90% blockage here. Now that blood is trying to push through, right, 10% or 5% of this vessel. And when that vessel closes, what's going to happen is that just like a balloon, a tire, let's say, and you're putting air in that tire. Well, if there's a blockage, if there's something that's blocking it, right, the tire gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it bursts. And that's the same thing with the vessels of the heart. If they're 100% blocked, that vessel will get bigger and bigger and bigger until it bursts. So, as you age, of course, it's something that you really want to take a look at, how much saturated fat you have. Take a look at those, that LDL and HDL. That's pretty routine. blood test, and just kind of stay on top of that so that you don't get this blockage where you either need a bypass or it causes a heart attack that can be fatal. How much cholesterol, should we have? Well, there's cholesterol in the food that we eat. And so consequently, we really don't need to add too much cholesterol to our diet. We need cholesterol, right, to make cell membranes and help our body function the way it's supposed to, but we don't want to have too much cholesterol, right? Kind of the rule of thumb is, that you should limit the amount of cholesterol in your diet to about 5%, of the daily value. Now, those good fats I mentioned were the unsaturated fats, right? Because of that kind of bend, their room temperature. And one of the things that causes this bend is the bonds that are in the makeup of the strand. And one of the things that those bonds bring to the table are what we call omegas, right? Omega-3, omega-6s. Omega-6s, for example, are found in vegetable oils. So this is, you want to have, right, the olive oils and the peanut oil and the vegetable oil and so on in your diet. Where do we find them in our diet? Usually, you'll find them in the vegetable oils, but fish, for example. So when you are making these omegas, they are kind of an oily substance, and that oil, since it's unsaturated at room temperature, will not make that plaque that will build up in the blood vessels of the heart. Instead, it creates kind of a oily covering that keeps the vessels free of a buildup of plaque. So it's good for a lot of things that happen inside of the cell. And you can see this is the cell membrane here. We call this a lipid bilayer because it's made up of two layers. Here's layer 1 and layer 2 of fats. So very important to keep in our diet. Good sources, as I mentioned, fatty fish, tuna, salmon are really good. Different type of nuts are also good for that. Cows, chickens that are fed, grain based diet. So all those things that we're told to kind of watch out for. So now, that being said, as I'm touting the value of fish, remember we want to limit some people the amount of fish that you eat, because for some people fish is not the best option, because a lot of times fish taken out of the lake or ocean will contain mercury, right? If they happen to be near power plants and things like that, put mercury into the water, the fish gets attracted to the mercury, and then the mercury gets inside the tissue of the fish. Fish gets eaten by another fish. There's a transfer. We call this biomagnification, right? That the effects of the mercury get worse as you go up the food chain. So by the time it gets to the person eating that fish, there's, the transfer rate is very high. So they tell, they usually say pregnant women really should avoid eating fish altogether because it does, you know, probably contain mercury unless it was, uh, fish that comes from a fish farm. Um, but if it's taken out of the lake or the ocean, it can pretty much guarantee that it probably has mercury in it. So it's best for expectant mothers, don't eat fish at all because of the risk of mercury. Because what mercury does is it affects the nervous system. So especially in young children, you can get a effect where it slows down their cognitive thinking skills and um, things like that. Right? As I get into fish, as I just explained, if you happen to be near an electric power plant, they dump um, that water into a body of water, and the mercury gets in there. So um, if you're pregnant, or you really should, again, not eat fish of any kind. Pregnant women of childbearing age, that would be something that we would take because mercury is a heavy metal. So it, in addition to the biomagnification, right, where it gets worse going up the food chain, it also bioaccumulates, which means that once you consume it, it gets into your tissues and it will stay there. And it just, we have no way of getting rid of heavy metals from our system once they're in our tissue. So, you know, probably, a good thing if you're going to have children to limit the amount of fish. And if you are pregnant, not to have fish at all. What fish are safer to eat? Anything, as I mentioned, that's farm raised, right? Because it's not going to get that mercury from power plants or uh, smokestacks or places like that. And a lot of places will tell you, like the Shed Aquarium, for example, has an advisory card that they put out, and it tells you how much mercury and which fish to avoid eating altogether, and then which fish are a little bit better for you. Is there a safe level of mercury? Really not sure. Uh, Again, pregnant women, because of the bio magnification, um, younger children. I always kind of laugh about mercury because I was a youngster, 8, 9, 10. We used to actually play with mercury because it's kind of an interesting element, right? It's the only element it's liquid and solid really at the same time. So, you know, it would be in thermometers. Well, now they don't put mercury in thermometers anymore. It's usually an alcohol-based thermometer, or people don't even use thermometers. They use these scanners and things like that. So there's probably not a safe level of mercury. Like I said, we used to play with it as a kid, but not that often. I mean, how often does a thermometer break? But it used to be pretty common, to find kids with little containers of mercury um, and, playing with it. So there's probably not a good level, um, especially, pregnant women and really young children should avoid it altogether. Do we need to eat fish? No, of course we can get our omegas from um, other food sources, so if you're avoiding eating fish, then you have to get it other places. Legumes like soybeans um, and canola oil, so you have to get it somewhere else. Or you can take fish oil capsules. it'll be a good source of omega-3s for you. And you get the benefits without having to eat the fish. So, we want to replace those saturated fats that we've been eating with unsaturated fats. And there's lots of different studies that are out there as to, the benefits of doing that. So, and then lastly, the really bad, are those trans fats. And the reason they're really bad for us is because these are man-made fats. They're not that fat that we look at, either saturated or unsaturated, right? So, when we look at like margarine, you know, that was manufactured, or it is manufactured. What we find now is a lot of margarines and oils and things that we used to cook food in that contain trans fatty acids no longer are on the market because they were raising that low, remember the low density lipoprotein that I talked about that's supposed to be low, it was raising that higher and higher. So, and causing, more blockages in people's hearts and things like that. So, trans fats, there's no reason to have trans fats in our body whatsoever. So, make sure that you're looking at the labels on food, right? See here, here's our total fat, 12 grams. Saturated, right? 3 grams, right? That's the fat we really don't want to have. And then it'll tell you trans fat, there's 3 grams here, right? This should always be 0. You don't want to eat anything that has trans fatty acids in them. Now, that being said about the 0, it is legal for manufacturers to say trans fat 0 if they contain up to 0.49% trans fats. So, if you're eating things and you don't want to put too many of those, anything that says trans fat 0, because it could be 0 doesn't always mean 0, right? So 0 could mean almost, 0.5%. Well, if I'm eating 6 or 7 things that day that indicate trans fats, 0, I could be eating up to 3.5% trans fat. So it's better, if this is not on the label at all, because then it really means 0. So, make sure you're not only you're looking at these, right? This is trans fat 0, but notice, it also says homogenated, which is kind of a code for trans fats. So, just make sure that you're also, kind of looking at what a trans fat is, so that you're not eating them without really knowing it, right? As long as you know what the keywords are to look for: hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated. If there's a lot of that in there, it's probably not something you want to eat too much of, right? So our last piece here, replace those saturated fats with unsaturated fats, right? It'll help reduce heart disease. You want to increase those omega-3s in your diet, and you want to avoid eating the trans fats, right? So read your labels. Get your fats from unsaturated sources, not saturated, as little as possible anyway. And then avoid the trans fats as much as possible. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is by reading your labels, right? And it'll tell you, here we've got 0 trans fats, if I'm looking over here, do I see my hydrogenated or shortening or partially hydrogenated? Any of that? No, I don't see that at all. So I know this is here, zero really means zero. So this is going to give me a good blend. I see canola oil, um, soy, all those things that are good for the blood vessels of my heart. So this would be something that I would want to take a good look at. And then, back to our heart food pyramid, this is the recommended pyramid that we stick with. Just, kind of refer back to that, get away from the pyramids that are put out by the dairy industry or the meat industry, things like that. Now, if you have any questions, please let me know. And of course, I'm available via email. This is an online course, so everything here is done we call synchronously. So just let me know if I can help you in any way. Hope you have a good week. I will see you next Sunday.